Hey guys, welcome to the seventh episode. I'm really sorry that I'm starting this episode very late. The reason being I was out working and I just returned back and I'm so tired. But let's start this episode. The chapter that we are reading is Vatsa Mantra, and let me start. He then asked me to close my eyes, seal my lips, and follow his instructions in exactly the manner he elaborated. It must have taken about 10 minutes for the entire process, and when his voice stopped, I opened my eyes into the calm, serene atmosphere. I was hooked. He handed over to me the tape recordings of the process and looked me steadily in the eyes. I am now giving you permission to teach superconscious meditation, he said steadily. You are the first to use this name for the ancient method of our tradition. I have not yet given this permission to anyone else. Go out and lecture in the cities and institutions, teaching this tradition systematically whenever the audience is ready. I have taught you exactly as my master has taught me. Naturally, I felt flattered, but I also felt unequipped. I'm not quite sure what my adequate response should be for this bestowal. During your meditation, you will do 45% of the effort, and I'll do 55%, he added, reading my mind. I sensed by his commitment to me that something of major importance was taking place, but I couldn't even imagine its magnitude. It fascinated me just to anticipate exploring the mind's terrain. His presence gave such credibility to the adventure that I couldn't wait to begin. Now that you have your mantra and know the method, I am obliged to you, he said. Do it twice a day, let me know the hours you choose, and I will attend you. How long should I meditate each day? I imagined sitting for hours. 10 minutes is okay. Don't force the mind, for it won't be pushed. Little does he know. I thought to myself why I'll be cruising in the higher regions of superconsciousness within days. So much for my bravado. It took me 6 months to sit quietly for 10 minutes without fidgeting for 30 seconds. I wanted to make a donation to Swami Rama, but he refused. Over all the years I have been with him, he has never accepted money from me for any of his teachings. Again, our visit was short and to the point. He invited me to attend his lectures. Driving back home, I realized I had forgotten to ask him my list of questions. Everything from dreams to mantra to meditation and the responsibility for teaching. As the years went on, I would always forget all my questions in his presence, yet somehow the answers would always be manifested. Each day I practiced meditation morning and evening. Actually, meditation was not new to me. As a monk, I had been obliged to meditate at least once a day, but there had been no instructions nor instructors in the art. We were left to our own devices as to how to fill in the time. I had been forced to research meditation on my own and had soon discovered that meditation was considered a discursive activity, sometimes called mental prayer. It involved thinking about a scriptural quotation, pondering pious images from the life of Christ or his saints, and arriving at a practical resolution in self betterment. According to the textbooks, meditation was also considered a beginner's level practice on the spiritual path and was typically reserved only for those in monasteries. The advanced goal of the spiritual path, according to religious authorities, was to get to contemplation, which consisted of a supernatural awareness and union with a divine object of focus. Contemplation, however, couldn't be obtained by one's own efforts. It was a gratuitous, non discursive gift of the Holy Spirit. The entire process of Christian meditation had become strictly a cognitive activity. The body, the breath, the subletics of the sense, and the mind's concentration were ignored. Later, I found out that my monastery was not unique in its ignorance of meditation. Such ignorance prevailed across Christendom. A few old texts found in dusty chambers stirred my imagination to reconsider the way contemporary writers spoke of meditation. but they had been ignored for so many centuries that they were basically unknown. There were no guides. Now, using Swami Rama's method, I sat down early each morning and began. After a few days, I was surprised that as I sat quietly, I could hear the sound of the railroad more than 3 miles away. I could hear the birds outside, the garbage men working their way down the alley, the creaking of the house. After a while, I became annoyed because I kept hearing a loud pounding, finally realizing that it was my heart. Next, I noticed a loud, high pitched sound in my right ear, which, like the sound of my heartbeat, refused to go away. I broke out in a profuse sweat along my spinal column. I felt warmth expanding up my back. I took off most of my clothes, turned off the apartment heat, opened the window, even though it was late fall, and still I felt cooked. Bright lights came and went, images popped into my mind, old memories, the usual train of thoughts, but I persisted in remembering my mantra. These flushes of energy reminded me of a peculiar experience I had had when I was a Dominican monk in 1961. I had been sitting in a small chapel with the rest of the monks as the rector gave his weekly lecture. I had found the talk piously boring and had let my mind wander in all directions, seeking something to interest me. Suddenly, an expanding flush of energy started in my pelvic region and expanded upwards and downwards simultaneously, filling my entire body. I had thought I was going to explode. The feeling of expansion had been accompanied by intense waves of what I had thought was sexual pleasure, yet was not. The intensity had been there, but there had been nothing external about it. I had gasped, reeling from the experience while my rational mind had tried to analyze it at the same time. It had been a totally unfamiliar phenomena lasting a few minutes but leaving me perplexed, fascinated by the clues to a mystery, wanting to figure it out and not knowing how. Now that I was experiencing the energy flow in meditation, I realized that my monastic episode had given me a preview of this inner awakening. The mantra drew me deeper into an awareness of these energy changes, and I realized that it was my own self I was experiencing. Mantra, that which removes the disturbances of the mind, intrigued me. Mantra is a sacred sound, a vibration that affects reality. The notion that sound could affect the unconscious part of my mind made me speculate that my nature was constituted by vibrations. In physics, I had learned that tangible matter at that subatomic level is composed of waves. Thus, I kept thinking that my body must be a dense field of vibrations. Could my entire mind be finer bands of vibrations? I began to read in the yoga tradition about this obtuse topic and discovered a manuscript that mentioned that sound is the root of all creation and that when it reaches a certain intensity, sound transforms itself into light. I immediately associated this with the opening of St. John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. Gradually, I learned that the vibration of a mantra affects the energy levels composing one's nature, manifesting the qualities specified by the particular vibrations of the mantra. Genuine mantras are never made up nor chosen arbitrarily. They were revealed to the ancient sages while they were in deep states of meditation and then tested to ascertain how the vibration impacted reality. The sages themselves became the proto experimenters with these mantras and noted their effect on body, mind, and nature. From that analysis, the sages selected mantras for their students to bring out qualities needed for their spiritual well being. The yoga tradition uses mantras for many different aspects of life: healing, acquiring miraculous powers, awakening intelligence, attracting people and goods, controlling the forces of nature, forestalling death. Dear friends, in this chapter of What's a Mantra, we see and we hear that Justin O'Brien talks about his initial experiences Once he was a Dominican monk in 1961, and then his experience with Swami Rama. In both of the places, he talks about the energy that is generated in his body through the mantra. It's not necessarily that if you enchant some mantra, then only your body or your soul will be awakened. But if you are doing some dhyana yoga, this thing can also be achieved. You must have seen those videos of the monks in Himalayas who are like almost naked, wearing their langut or the underwear, and they are in the minus temperature. How can these things be possible? See, we all have a body temperature, right? And through meditation and yogic experiences, our temperature can also be raised. Now, when we talk about the Kundalini Shakti, the power of the chakras and everything, that is the kind of energy, the vibrations that goes from your base chakra to your crown chakra. What is that energy? Is it temperature? Is it vibrations like Justin mentioned? Or it's a mix of both? I think for each one it's different. So it's not only one sect or one way of understanding yourself. There are two or three ways which are already being prescribed in Sanatan Dharma. One can attain that supremeness in oneself through hatha yoga or pranayam or yoga kriya. The other thing is through making yourself aware by reading such texts, and this might comprise of like reading Bhagavad Shastra or the tikas on different Ved Puran, and you try to believe in the uniqueness and you don't believe in duality. So the sect focuses on Aham Brahmasmi Shivo Aham. The third phase, or I should say the third sect actually, believes in if you enchant on some magical words. In Hindu tradition, some of the words alphabet are called Bij Mantra, but in actuality, if you see the Hindi Varnamala, every alphabet belongs to a Bij Mantra of some god or goddess. That's true. So even if you are trying to speak, for instance, if you are saying aim, right, it's an English word, but that can also be dedicated to some god or goddess. Same way, these people enchant these mantras for so long and they believe in duality, and then they are able to relate to that god. And in the final phase, they feel that that god is a supreme god, and the energy from that the god comes into their body, and then they both are in unison, the god and the believer. So there are different ways of practicing Hinduism. There are different ways of people who are like totally atheists, and without going much deeper into the text, they can also practice things. The best practice in all the sects is about breathing. So if you breathe in and breathe out, and even if you are an atheist and you are not enchanting any mantra, breathe in and breathe out. It will not only give you enough oxygen in your lungs and mind, but it will also cure you in different ways. So for today, I'll end this video, and I really hope that you might have benefited from it. I would really appreciate if you can write your comments or suggestions, because I'm doing it for a hobby. I know I don't have like mic and other accessories which should be there. I'm not adding any music or any kind of gimmicks because I'm doing it for myself. But yeah, if someone's listening to this, so let me know. And I also have time constraints. Sometimes I like bulk upload, sometimes I get time to record it. But yeah, this is a current version. This is today itself. So this is not one of the bulk upload. I hope this new year 2021 is really good for everyone, and let humanity prevail. Thank you very much for listening to me. Jai Shri Ram, Jai Hanuman, Jai Shri Krishna.